Howdy mates. Good late morning. How are we all doing? It is March 2nd, 2022. You could say this is the very first video I've had a chance to make for the month of March. And I gotta tell you, I find it very hard to believe that it is already March. That's crazy. Yeah, it's already March. And considering that now we are getting a little closer to spring, it actually has started to warm up just a little bit down here. And I actually saw for some of my northerner friends and family, it started to warm up for you guys too, a little bit. So where I'm at today is the Manasota Scrub Preserve. I haven't been here actually for a hot minute. You could say for my day off, I'm just staying a little more local, more or less. I'm not going too far. And honestly, I didn't really feel like doing a ton of driving. But the Manasota Scrub Preserve is a great example of seeing like a scrub hammock. So what I mean by scrub hammock is we're kind of like at a transition right now. You know, we're at a point when the scrub is starting to become a hardwood hammock. So yeah, it's kind of like that in-between phase. Because you figure at one point, like where we're standing, this was once, under the ocean. And then it progressively turned into a dune. And then eventually it turned into a, just a scrub habitat, mostly of shrubs and whatnot. And then eventually you have the slash pine. And then of course we have our live oak. So it's a very, what you call, progressive type of system. Now, rest assured, I'm not speaking of nature's insurance. Progressive, yeah. Okay. Or rather, progressive is just my other way of saying the term succession. And that term basically describes where a given ecological community changes over time. Because that's the tendency of Mother Nature. It will always take over once it has a chance. No different than if you see like an abandoned cornfield, for example. Eventually, in due time, there will be other varieties of vegetation that begin to grow in that lot. But succession tends to take a little bit of time. That's all it takes, really, is time. But oftentimes, when you're in a scrub hammock, the soil will tend to be a bit more xeric, especially this time of the year, considering that we really haven't had much rain in the past couple of months. So you could say right now the soil is relatively dry. And the amazing part is the vegetation that is here has a specific adaptation to actually retain its water in their roots over time. Because in a sense, that's a way of basically conserving their use. They'll use the water for storage and use it only when absolutely necessary. Quite amazing, isn't it? We could actually learn from nature, how we can conserve what it is we need most. To not use more than what we have to. I've actually made this reference in the past as something called the honorable harvest, which was from a book that I read called Braiding Sweetgrass. By the way, mates, if you haven't read that book, from someone like me, who is an aspiring and prospective naturalist, and for those of you who are trying to get into something very similar, as well worth a read. Now, what's actually fascinating, too, as I've mentioned before in past videos, is, what we see ahead of us is something called a saw palmetto. And what's particularly neat about the saw palmetto is they are indeed a keystone species in this ecosystem. Yes, even plants can act as a keystone species. So these saw palmettos are absolutely necessary to provide a food source and even a refuge, too, for our wildlife. And it also helps shape the ecosystem here. Because what the saw palmettos do is they essentially act as a stabilizer. Now, I don't mean a stabilizer in terms of chemistry. I mean a stabilizer in terms of holding the soil together. So that's what's remarkable about saw palmetto, is they actually form these long networks of roots. Now, you can't directly see them because there's a lot of cover, especially coming from the needles of the slash pine. But typically, when you see like the actual leaf itself, that's only the tip of the plant. But instead, the roots sort of act like a giraffe's neck. They're actually very extensive. And what's even more remarkable too about these saw palmettos is that they're actually very old, especially those that have been established for quite some time. There's even been record of some saw palmettos being as old as 10,000 years old. That's truly remarkable. That's like, wow. Can you just imagine how much they've seen in that amount of time? That's the thing. They're actually a very slow growing plant. But Manasota Scrub Preserve is actually a really neat place to visit. It's in between Englewood and Venice, and it is part of Sarasota County, their park system. But since we're kind of like the in-between phase of winter going into spring, there aren't as many blooms yet. But you give it another month or two, and that really will change. That's the thing, mates. Even though it doesn't always seem like Florida has changing seasons, it's not necessarily true. They do. But it doesn't always have to do with temperature either. Some of it could do with the vegetation. So, alright you guys. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. And feel free to share it if you so desire. So, and by the way, mates, stay tuned for this upcoming weekend. If all goes as planned, it is really going to be a great trip as well. I'll be visiting a new area that I've never been to in Florida. So, for those of you who do know, keep it quiet, please. So, alright you guys, take care, enjoy your Wednesday, and journey on a journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.